want to welcome you to our last day of Share. My name is Ed Webb. I'm here to introduce our speaker and her compatriot over here, Travis Vero, Mrs. Marna Wally. I want to thank y'all for coming. Be sure and fill out your session evaluations at the end. This is being recorded. So if you have an objection to being recorded or heard, if you make an ask a question, you're welcome to leave the room. Otherwise, stick around and I think you'll have a great session with Marna.
All right, thanks guys. Okay, we're good online too? Yes. Okay, all right. So welcome. I am not Herenshaw. He's a good buddy of mine back in Poughkeepsie. He is at a lovely wedding in Mexico, which is why I'm covering this for him, and which is good. He deserves a break with his family. So I wish him well. I hope he's online listening. Yeah, at the wedding in Mexico, he's listening to this. This is about a new function that came in ZOS. Okay, and I'll get to more of the details about where it went back and what PTF you can find it in and everything, but it's a new function that came in ZOS. It's called the ZOS Management Services Catalog. I call it ZMSC, and I'm not sure if that's the proper terminology acronym, but I call it ZMSC, Management Services Catalog. Okay, and Heren is the expert in this area. His email is on the cover, and I'm on the screen. Is that right? Okay. All right. Okay. But you guys know me. I'm mwally at us.ibm.com. I do a lot of installation work. I also do a lot of exploitation work for system programmers, because a lot of times an exploitation item eventually might come an upgrade item. So I do get involved in using new functions as well. So once you upgrade, I want you to use new functions. And this is a perfect example of using a new function. And it's a fun function to use, I think, as well. And I think it'll be really useful in your environment. So let's talk about why we need this. Why do we need the Management Services Catalog? Why do we need ZMSC? We'll talk about some of the ZOS tasks that you might have in your environment. We'll talk about the tasks that you might help other people do. And we'll talk about the tasks that the people really want to start doing themselves and not have to rely upon the experienced system programmer to do. We'll talk about how to create a service. Okay, this is what these things are called. They're called services. This is the Managed Service Catalog. And then we also want to talk briefly about some of the user privileges, because as you start to allow users and you start to define your own services, you will see that maybe there's something that requires specific authority, right? We've had this encounter all along. I have to do a task, it requires a specific authority. I'm not going to give that person authority to do everything, right? So how are we going to handle that? And that's something that Managed Service Catalog handles for us in a workflow. It's really nice. And then we'll talk about how to get started. So has anybody started ZMSC yet? You've been reading our materials. You've started it first. Okay, great. So this is the place to be, because I think this is where you're going to learn about it. It's not hard to get it up and running. Very easy to have your first service yourself in your environment, and we can see how it goes in your enterprise. So the first thing is why. Why do we need this thing? Why did we have to do Management Services Catalog? Because, you know, look in the back row, you don't need, if you're sitting back there, you don't need your glasses on. Managing ZOS is complex and is very manual, right? We know that, we understand that. We need to do something to help in this particular area. And of course, going along with that is the learning curve is very steep. Okay, so to try to teach somebody to do this can be rather complicated. And also on their part, it's not so fun even to have to learn a lot of these things that we are asking them to learn, and using methods that seem very archaic to them. So they have to do a lot of learning just to learn how to learn to do what they're been told that they need to do. So the learning curve is very steep. So OSMF tool, you can see we've done a lot of simplification effort in order to do easier management of the ZOS operating system. Okay, and it's become very handy, and I'm really happy that you all have OSMF running on at least your driving system, your sandbox system, which is a good thing to know. So really ZMSC is written for two types of users. The first type is the experienced or even the mid-level system programmer. where they can take the knowledge that they have over many years, or even just the knowledge that they've acquired, let's say over the past 5 or 10 years, and they can put that knowledge and encode them into something called a service. And these people would be the administrators of ZMSC, sorry. And these people, as they create the services, they are known as the administrators of the services, because they create them, they encode them, they get them just the way that they want them for their own enterprise, customized, and then they publish them into a catalog, and that makes them administrators of those services. But on the other side of that, I got to think of, why did I publish these things in a catalog? And it's really for the early tenure system programmers to look in the catalog, and when they see they need to do these tasks, they can complete them very easily and quickly. And what's beautiful about this is when the administrators put the services into the catalog, it is customized for the requirements of your enterprise. So let's say you have to have, the high level qualifier of all of your, your ZFS file systems have to start with OMBS, right? That's what we do on our systems. So now I can encode that into the service, that all of my ZFS file systems start with OMBS. Or if they have to go on a specific store class, I can encode that into the service. And this makes it very easy, because not only are these early tenure system programmers using these services and doing things very quickly, but they're conforming to the enterprise guidelines that you have encoded as an administrator. Okay, so that's the idea behind ZMSC. So what's the benefits of this is when both the administrators define these services and get them the way they wanted, and the early tenure system programmers use them, you can see that you have reduced errors. The complexity is very much reduced. You can minimize the time on task, and they also require less help, so that the more experienced people don't have to continually keep helping the people that are just learning ZOS with what turn out to be rather tedious tasks. Okay, so that's the big idea behind ZMSC. So let's look at the task. Here's a very simple example. This is an example of, I want to define a ZFS. Okay, so one way of doing that, of course, is with JCL, and this is what it might look like, just an example. And so an entry-level system programmer may need to define a ZFS file system, and they might use a 3270 terminal. They might use ISPF to complete tasks that have to define. This is JCL, of course. They're going to go in there and have to change JCL. Well, maybe, they'll put the name of the cluster wrong, or they'll put it on the wrong volume, things like that. And so you really, you can't really enforce anything that they might be having to do. And so then you'd have to go as a more experienced person. Oh, you defined the ZFS wrong. I got to go delete it and redefine it. So this is what a entry-level person might be faced with if they're doing a very tedious task, such as just defining a new ZFS. Okay, so this is the old way of doing it. So now we're going to show a little demo. Okay, it's done. It's written by an engineer, a friend of mine, Connor. He's really good in development. Got a good voice, so you'll like that. So he is going to show you what an entry-level programmer might encounter if they're going to do, one of the sample services that we provide. So let's see if this works.
In this video, we're going to show how a user can use the management services catalog to perform a couple simple services. So let's get started by opening our management services catalog. And here we see we have a couple services. So we're going to go ahead and select our create a ZFS file system service. And now we can select a system we want to run our service on, and we can get started. So on this general page, we see we are immediately asked to provide our dataset name. So we'll go ahead and enter demo.zfs. And we see there are other optional inputs on this page, but as they're optional, we don't need to provide any additional values. So we can move on to the next page, where we're prompted for a primary allocation size. So we'll enter 2 megabytes in this particular service.
All customizable.
We see that we have a selection of disk names. We'll use the default. And now we're on to the run properties page. Here, we can review all of the inputs we've put in If we want to go back and make a change, we can select the pencil icon, go back to the page, and maybe we want 3 megabytes. Pretty simple change, but just demoing how you can easily review and update your parameters and then run your service. Now the service is ran, we can view it in activity. You can see that the service is still running, review the timeline for this particular service, and again, review any inputs used for it. You can see that the timeline's been updated and the service has already been completed. Now we can find our service in the History tab. So, since we created a data set, we'll use the File and Dataset Explorer to go verify that we actually created our data set. So let's see, our name was demo.zfs. Go throw that in the search here. And we can see that, in fact, our data set was created. And move on. We'll resume our view of the catalog. Now we want to mount our newly created data set. So, similar to before, we're provided a page of general inputs. We need to find our required inputs. We can review exactly the details of this input, and we see that it's just looking for a mount point. So we're going to go ahead and just mount this to temp/demo. Because this is not created yet, we'll select the create option to make sure that the service will also create this mount point for us. And then we have a lot more optional options, and we could choose to make it a shared file system, update ParmLab. But again, these are all optional. And for this demo, we're just going to go ahead and simply mount our file system. Just as before, we can see that our service is now in the Activity tab. We can see that it's running. We can review any potential inputs. And we see already on the side that this has been completed. Since it's complete, it joins our other service in our History tab. And we can take one more trip back to the catalog to maybe expand this file system. It was a pretty small file system, and we're not going to make it much larger. But we can see here, it's a very simple service where we're just selecting what data set we want to expand. Maybe we want to set a new size, add a particular amount, or multiply the size of it. For this demo, we're just going to add another 2 megabytes on top. Go into our run properties, and maybe instead of running now, we want to queue this service for a later date. This will set a run window for the service. This run window means that anytime within this window, the service can be ran. It will not automatically be ran, but it provides a window to say, hey, run this in between this time. So we set it for any time this week, we'll be fine to run this service. We can see it's now in activity. It's not running, however, it is ready to run because right now is in the active run window. So we can go ahead and choose to run the service now, which will change its status from ready to run to running. As usual, we can review our timeline and any additional information about this, and we see that it's already completed and has moved to history. One last thing to show before we close out our demo is how we can look at a more detailed view of how any service ran by going to it in the History tab, selecting the Open in Workflows option, which will open the OSMF Workflows task. These workflows were what ran to perform our services, and we could see any more particular, more detailed output from these services here. That wraps up this demo, and thank you for watching.
All right, so hopefully that gave you a good impression of what we can run, and you saw the user side of it, right? So the pesky users coming to you said, oh, I want a ZFS, I want a bigger ZFS, I want you to mount my ZFS. You're like, yeah, go out here and use the service, right? And I, as the administrator, defined all of the required inputs to that service. I put any conforming things, I put defaults that I wanted, I put all of the options, You can see that. So I've got a lot of control as an administrator here. And what you also saw is what's behind the whole thing are workflows, right? Automated workflows. Okay. And those sample services that we have are the ones that will give you, let's call them sample workflows we'll give them, right? Question? Yeah, so that's a good question. So we saw it done in a batch job, but a lot of times to define a ZFS, you can use ZFS admin, you can, I don't know, there's a million different things to do. Oh, you can do all that stuff. Yes. So what we have is those are sample services that are provided, right? And we have for the sample services chosen one of the ways that we're going to do that. If you didn't like the batch job way and you wanted to use the ZFS admin shell script way, you are more than welcome to define a workflow. And maybe you already have this today in one of your handy dandy JCL jobs or whatever you want. And all you'd have to do is put that into a workflow. And that would be your favorite way of creating a ZFS or expanding a ZFS. As the administrator, you do whatever you want. As long as you can get it in a workflow and you know to create a workflow, you can do JCL, shell script, Rex, REST APIs. You do whatever you want in a workflow. And you guys told me ahead of time, you know workflows. So you know what it can do and it's very powerful, right? Okay. So that was the user side, right? That was the self-service kind of answer here that we saw. One thing also, while my screen is trying to come back alive. All right, maybe, oh, there it did come back. So really what you'd see is that we've really, flickering is really annoying, but okay. Or annoying for me and I got my back to it. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, so here was an example of how you could do it in JCL. You might have an example of doing it in a shell script. There's many different ways of doing many different things, right? Or sometimes if a product provides a JCL job to do a sample, you're not going to go convert that into ZFS commands or whatever you wanted. But anyway, we're moving from this kind of a world where there's no rigid control over what a user might do into this kind of world where the service has been defined. You as an administrator have a lot of control on what the user can put as options, right? So if I wanted the user not to be able to have more than 3 megabytes in a ZFS, I can make sure that that top limit's only 3 megabytes, right? So here we are, we're moving into a different sort of a world now. And underneath it all as administrators, because I think we will all be administrators, all driven by workflows, automated workflows. And one thing I wanted to mention was when he moved the timeline, it doesn't, again, he said it will be eligible to run during that time frame. It will not run in that time frame. It will be eligible to be run. So that would mean that it would still have to go in and be run by somebody, like the user, the admin, whoever. So I just wanted to kind of say that again, is that you put a time frame. It doesn't mean that ZMSC is going to start that service and run it. It means it will only be allowed to be run by somebody else in that time frame. Okay. There is not automated scheduling for it. That is a question. That is not what is there today. So yeah. That's why I wanted to repeat that. It is not going to run it. It's not an automated scheduler. It's not an automation package to run it. It just means you cannot run it until these, you're inside of this time frame. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. Hey, what's the question?
From the user perspective.
Yeah, so the question is, when you create the service, is there an administration required time frame, time bound on that service? I don't think there is. I haven't seen it in there because remember these services are going to be rerun and rerun and rerun, right? So it would be hard to define a service. You'd have to almost define a new service for every time frame that you wanted. Yeah, I don't think that's in there. So yeah. 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 Well, the administrator, right, or the user would, indicate for that. But that's good. Let me take note of that. Okay. So here we have had a lot of early users try this function, and you can see the visuals for this that these early users have really participated in, and even the terminology that you can see within the services really were bounced off and co-created with users itself. So here's an early tenure programmer that said, you know, it's unique that it will help rookies like me who come in with very little knowledge on how to execute a batch job. I can accelerate my learning curve by providing services that include the required JCL to complete the management tasks, right? So he's just validating that's exactly what, you know, this service was provided for. All right, so we're going to change how experienced system programmers can now help these early tenure colleagues perform their management tasks. Okay, so we saw the user thing. Now let's turn the coin, and we're going to look at the administrator side of ZMSC. Okay, so system programmers are going to be able to create and modify a service. Then they can approve the service so that it gets published into the catalog, right? This tool, this function is called management services catalog, right? Because you can go shopping in the catalog for services. So the admin side puts services into that catalog, and you can work on the configuration of those settings. And that's where your enterprise requirements would come in that you can put in there. So it looks like this. This is what the administration panel looks like. Oh, by the way, we have a lab where you can run a service and publish and administer a service. So we have a lab to do today for that function, and our share LPAR is up today. So if you came yesterday, I'm very sorry. Today it is up. So how an administrator might teach or help somebody to do something like create their own ZFS. And this is just an example. They might have created a PowerPoint presentation. I don't know. There's a million different ways you can teach your, you know, younger system programmers how to do things. Here's just an example of perhaps how a more experienced person might teach somebody how to do what you just saw, how to allocate a ZFS, how to mount a ZFS, how to increase the size of the ZFS. Okay, so here this is just not very pretty. And again, you'll have, you know, people doing whatever they want, maybe. It's not really rigid. So this is, you know, a more complicated thing. So this gets into, we have provided sample services for you. Now these sample services, because let's put our administrator hat on now, what does this mean? These are sample workflows that we've given you, and you can modify them any way you want, or you can not even use them if you don't want to. If you have a different defined ZFS job and you want to do that, by all means, go and do that. But these are just samples that we wanted to provide to get you started with some services that we thought were very common. Okay, see, you can see here, what is this, like 7 services we got. There's a lot around ZFS. Replace the SMP receive order certificate because that thing expires every 12 months. Okay, we got that one in there. Delete a RACF user ID. Yeah, that's my pet peeve. Me and yeah, Ed was one of our early users. So delete a RACF user ID and delete an alias from a catalog. So those are the kind of sample services that we have. And you can model after these. You can change them for your own needs. You can do whatever you want to with these sample services. So let's get into the second introduction. So what you're going to see in this demo with Connor, our good speaker, is he's going to take it from now the experienced system programmer side, and he's going to show you how to put these services into the catalog. Let's go away, Connor. Okay.
Oh, in this video, we're going to be showing one possible way that an administrator can get started using the Management Services Catalog. So we're going to start by navigating into the Management Services Catalog, and we can see that our catalog is currently empty. So we navigate to the Administration tab, where we can see a handful of sample services. So now that we see our sample services, we're going to go ahead and make some copies. This will allow us to make customizations to these services without impacting the original sample. So we're just going to make 3 quick copies of the create, mount, and expand a ZFS file system services. Now that we've created our copies, we can go ahead and make a new category for them. We'll go ahead and create the demo category and move our new services into that category. Now let's go ahead and take a look at one of our services. Here on this main page, we can update the description and name, but then we want to move over to our Inputs tab. This is where we can see all the various inputs for this service, what pages they're on, the various logical associations between these inputs, and so on. We can also edit these inputs. So for example, we're going to take this disk names input, we're going to change it from a text field to a selection, and then we can input some disk names that are relevant to our environment. This way, when a user uses the service, they don't need to know disk names offhand. They will be provided radio buttons where they can select, and we can provide them a default as well. With that change made, we're going to go ahead and publish the service. Now we will go back to the administration table to work on our other two services we made. Quickly update the name. We can move over to this services input tab, and we see there's a lot more pages, a lot of inputs. We could go and review these, make sure they're all correct for our use case or make any adjustments needed. But for this demo, we're going to say that this looks good to us, and we'll go ahead and publish it. Going to take one last quick trip to the administration table to publish our final expand service here. Quick name change, glance at the inputs, and publish. Now we can see the status of our three services in the demo category are all published. And if we go to the catalog, we'll see our services here. Lastly, we're going to take a quick trip over to the global settings tab. This is where an administrator can make settings that affect the overall plugin, such as what systems are enabled for the plugin to run services on, if services require certain levels of approval before publishing, job statements used to run services, and manage the history of service submissions. That's all for this demo, and thank you for watching.
Okay, so a couple of things I wanted you to know. Services run on a system, just like workflows run on a system. You could have a service that needed to be customized for that system and a different service that could be used on another system, right? So you see where this is going. I could have something in test, I could have something in production. Different systems, maybe different inputs. The other thing he mentioned really quickly, approval. So let's say one of the steps had to do some networking or some security things in the workflow step. And that, Joe, janitor, user is not allowed to do that stuff. Okay, we got a little thing coming up about that too as well. Okay, so trying to read your guy's mind, and you're going to say, oh, I got different systems and different settings. Got it. I got a workflow that's rather complicated. It's automated, but it's rather complicated. And I'm not going to let, Joe user do, any RACF work. Okay, fine. We can do that. All right. So far, so good. All right. So that was the other side. This was publishing it into the catalog. So you've seen a user go in and run these things. You've seen an administrator publish these things for what he wants. So what you will see here and what you had seen is that perhaps, a more experienced person to educate a, less experienced person, they might go through, again, PowerPoints and tell the user, oh, this is what you do on this system. And oh yeah, here's a different PowerPoint for when you're on that system, right? Okay, so it's getting confusing and the user is probably not really liking ZOS by this point. But down here, as an administrator, I can just set it up and tell the person, okay, we're ready to go on these services. Okay, so good thing about that. Okay, so now let's get a little bit deeper now. I'm an admin. I want to make a service. It's workflows underneath there. Everything probably turns out to be workflows in the end here, right? Customization on all our new functions, all in workflows. Advertising or publishing of services, it's workflows under the covers. Okay, so how do you get services and how do you transform a workflow into a service? Because that's what's running these things. And again, they're all automated workflows. Because you just saw when you click on a service, it doesn't stop and say, oh, well, what's the name of that volume, right? No. User puts it in at the beginning of the service and then bam, it goes, it's automated. Okay, so it's got to be automated. So what could happen today is an experienced OSMF user could, and I know you guys do this, right? Because the minute we came out with workflows, I've been talking to users that have, I got a whole JCL library. I want to make it workflows. so that people will have to do my JCL, right? Well, that's totally fine. And experienced system programmers do create workflows from their stuff. But you know what? It's sometimes there's a lot of things. There can't be a lot of variability in the workflows that you might need. The workflow engine might be a little bit too rigid for you. You have to go through serially all of these variables. There's limits on how long this description is. There's some limitations on workflows. A lot of things, workflows brought us a big step forward, but services can go even beyond that as well. So here we go. We can have workflows today, but you know what you can do? You can take those workflows, and if they're automatable, we can make them into services, right? So here it is. I can do more and add additional helpfulness to those workflows to make them services. So here we go. Here we have another demo with Connor, and he is going to tell you now I can add logic between the steps or the inputs of this service, which is turning out to be workflow inputs and changes in there. And you can see how that makes, you can have a rather complicated workflow become a service. So let's go.
Hello, in this video, we're going to be demonstrating how an administrator can create their own service in the Management Services catalog. So we're taking a look at the administration panel, and we're going to go ahead and click the new service button. To create a new service, we need a workflow definition. So we've prepared a Hello World workflow. We'll just call our service Hello World and put it in our
This is the
demo
lab you're going to
category.
do. If you come to lab, it's the Hello Workflow lab. Or
Now we can
Hello
start
World
building our
Workflow.
service. So now that we've loaded our workflow in to the Management Services catalog, we can see some information about it. We could even view the workflow in the workflow editor. However, we know that this particular workflow just writes a greeting into a file or data set. Moving on to our inputs, where we can see all of our service inputs, we see immediately that this one is a little messy. The default value doesn't look quite right. So we're going to go ahead and just quickly update that while building our service. We'll just fix that to be Hello World. Additionally, we can see that we can change this from being an empty text box to being a selection type. And since this is supposed to be a greeting, we'll just add a couple greetings here and make sure that our user only can select our pre-decided values here. Now that we've customized that input a little bit, let's move on to organizing our pages. We see here all of our inputs are on a single page called Untitled. So let's first give this first page some sort of name. We'll call it Location. And let's give ourselves a second page to work with by clicking the New Page button. So now we'll make the second page and we'll call it Select Greeting. Pages can have descriptions to better describe what values and inputs should be expected by the user on these pages. And now that we've got that, we can go back to our starting location page, grab our greeting input, and we'll move it over to the Select Greeting page. If we go to the page now, we can see that our input has been moved and it's alone here on this page. Moving back to location, let's start organizing this page. Well, what's the most important part? We'll move this to the top. Is it a file or data set we're writing to? And let's add some logic to this. If file is selected, we want to display the relevant file input. However, if dataset is selected, we want to show the relevant inputs to datasets. This is looking pretty good. So let's go and give our service a quick test and see what it looks like. We'll give this a test on system 1. And we can see what our user would see when running the service. When they select file, the file inputs are shown. When they select dataset, the dataset inputs are shown. And they have a second page here to select which greeting to write. However, you may notice that the inputs and even the pages themselves have been marked optional. This doesn't really make sense for our service since all these inputs when shown are really required. So let's go back to administration and fix that up. We'll go back to our inputs tab, select our inputs, and mark them as required. These logical inputs are required when shown. So if you are selecting a data set or a file, the required relevant inputs will be shown. Now that we've marked all our inputs as required, let's go back to our testing and see what an end user would see when running the service. We are now being required to select this. Now that file has been selected, we are required to put in a file path. We need to select a greeting. However, there's a default selected, so we can just go with that or change it to something else. We're going to be test running the service, so we run it right away. We can check on how it's doing in the activity tab. And we can see that it's already been completed. And see that we used file.txt, so we can open our file explorer real quick. Check out file.txt and see that our greeting was written into our file. Perfect. So now that that's working the way we want it to, we go back to administration, select our service, and publish it to the catalog.
Good.
Moving to the catalog, we see our service is now published and usable by our users. Thank you for watching.
Okay, so a couple of things here we usually have questions on. It came from a workflow, a bunch of nice customization in it, right? For what the user is going to see to make it a service. When it's saved or published, does it go back to the original workflow and update the XML from the workflow? No. Right now it's a service. It was just extracted from that workflow XML, was created into a service, and it's just a service now, right? I could still go back to that workflow XML, create a service from that same workflow XML, call it an entirely different service. It doesn't go back and update that workflow XML, okay? So just be aware of that. Some people pull the workflow up, say, oh, where's all that stuff I put in there? Why isn't it required? Where's the hello, hey, and hi, or whatever? No, I just use it as a basis to create my service. It doesn't go back into the workflow XML, into the service definition, okay? Common question we get. Okay, so you're gonna do that in the lab. You're gonna do hello world. What you just saw in there, he did in 10 seconds. Probably take about 30 minutes to do. It took a little longer than Connor. Connor is very familiar with this. Okay, it's not hard to do. It's just trying to find the right pages and the right options on it. It's not hard and it's fun to do. Okay, so what you saw was that a system programmer could take a workflow, any workflow that they have, and they could encode in the XML. They could use the workflow editor, which is a lovely way to create a workflow. And they could, define all of the variables they want and give all the options that they want on that. And then the user could go through and specify, the variables that they wanted filled in there. Really we're kind of limited to what the workflow engine is going to present to us in the order it's going to present for workflows. Very nice. But if we make it into a service, we have a whole lot more function and flexibility that we can do, where we can move these services or these options around in pages. We can entitle the pages. We can provide more information, description about that. Put more, required inputs or more customizing it for my particular environment as well. So we're going here from a workflow now into a service, right? Pretty high up on the stack now for good stuff. So we had a mid-level system programmer says, nice to know that OSMF management services catalog, helping us manage our IT infrastructure by modernizing our early tenure system programmers, the ability to perform these management tasks and reduce the learning curve to boost their productivity. Okay, again, that was one of our goals, why we did ZMSC. All right, so we got handling division of responsibilities, because I know you guys are saying, hey man, I'm not gonna let Joe User do a whole lot of this stuff. So I don't have a lot on this topic. It's just 2 slides. This can be a very deep conversation, but just for this presentation, just be aware of the following. You can use something that's called run as user for an experienced and mid-level system programmer. So what you can do in the workflow definition is you can avoid providing higher level privileges to the users of these services by getting the authorization to run particular steps within the workflow. And they would use the service and we would allow that user to run particular steps. Okay, don't want to say a whole lot about this because it's a very deep and complicated subject, but the capability is there so that you can publish services and the options to provide. You're not going to be limited in the services because you don't want one of the steps have to give authority for that, that entire function, just for the ability to run a service, a step. And then on the other side, for early tenure system programmers, you don't need that, entirely, the function to do everything when all you need to do is one of the steps into the workflow. So we will have the ability to switch identity to a privileged user to do that with authority to do that. Okay, so just be aware that the function is there and it shouldn't limit you to providing which services you want as services. So let's talk about getting started. So where is this stuff? Okay, it was all put in PTFs on ZOS 2.4 and 2.5. Okay, and that went out a while ago. I'm thinking, geez, when was that? Maybe end of last year. I'm thinking somewhere around there. It's definitely been out for a while now. So what it is the two PTFs that you put on either 2.4 or 2.5. Guess what? Of course, it requires some security configuration, of course, right? So we have a sample here, IZU MS sec, okay? And how you do that is you don't enable the function through IZU PRM as a plugin. You have to use the new dynamic general settings that are in OSMF. I'll show you a slide about that in a second. And even better than that, because there are security settings, it is pluggable into the security configuration assistant so that you can verify that your security configuration was set up correctly. All right, so let's look at validating the management services catalog in security configuration assistant. How do you validate that it worked well? You'll see that is under services in the security configuration assistant. And here you can put the user ID or the group ID that you want to validate. And here you can see that the result would have passed, meaning you did have that security definition set up correctly and that user has authority to use it. Okay, so the big idea here is run the sample job, verify with security configuration assistant. And then to enable the function, like I said, it's not in IZU PRM, like we have a lot of other plugins. It's underneath OSMF general settings. When you click on that, this is the new kind of options that we have that where OSMF is kind of managing OSMF, right? And so here you can see here a little toggle enabled or disabled for all of the functions that we have. Way down at the bottom, you'll see the new one, ZOS Management Services Catalog. You want to flip that from disabled to enabled. And of course, you have to stop and restart the server. So that's how easy it is to set up ZMSC. A little bit of security, general settings, flip it, stop, restart, you're going. Okay. So learn more and to get started. So we've got a lab. Tomorrow, this one, the lab is going to work today. I tried it out. So we got the system up and running, and it's going to be today at 3:30. Now, we also have a content solution webpage, and it is constantly being updated when new functions are delivered for ZMSC. So I would recommend that you do go to the content solution and see what's currently there. Okay. Now, because this is all based on workflows, right? We provided what, 7, 8 sample services today. Those are workflows that you can take and make those into services. You may have workflows as well that you want to do, right? But you also might want to go shopping where other people have handy workflows and you want to see what's out there, right? Well, there is an open mainframe project for Zorro, and Zorro is the open repository for workflows where we have had a lot of contribution of people that think that workflows are awesome and they have cool workflows, and they want to have people contribute to their own workflows so that they can really just make workflows better all the time. So you can go out and shop for free workflows out in Zorro. You can contribute to ones that are already there. This is a great place if you want to start with additional services that you can pull and create. Go out to Zorro, pull a workflow in and try it out. And you can test it, right? You saw that Connor was able to test the service before he actually did the publish on it, right? And then you like it or not like it, whatever you do, you can contribute to it. So we have a survey. We have a survey for ZMSC. Also, when you take the lab, did you want to mention a couple words about the survey, Travis, or? Okay, I will talk about the survey. We are very interested in your ZMSC feedback. Once you've had some experience with this, we would like to know how it was, what other additional comments that you have about it. Is there something more that you'd like to see in ZMSC? So you can take the survey by clicking on that. The PDF for this presentation has been uploaded, and also the PDF for the ZMSC lab that's this afternoon has been updated. There's 13 ZOSMF labs. This is one of them, and all 13 PDFs have been uploaded to the Share website. So you can have more than, it's very easy to take an opportunity to take this quick survey. It's only like 4 or 5 questions. It's very fast. And it would really help us if you wanted to participate also. And I know that Ed was a very early customer in this. He was absolutely critical to getting the management services catalog as far as it has gotten. So any questions? I am 9 minutes early, which is not usual for me. So who thinks they could go back, and if you even have this PTF on, it's even a little bit old, who thinks they could go through and maybe with a sample service, create one service and give it a try? Think you could do it? It's not hard. Who wants to have their users stop bothering them so that they could just go and do it as a service, right? I think it takes a lot of time out of our days to stop what we're doing and do this. So I'm hoping it will help make you more productive, and also the early tenure folks that you might have to do that. Who has their own workflows that they want to bring to this? Yeah. Not just the sample ones that we give you because they're just samples, but who has one that they have in mind for their own environment where they could do this? Cool. Excellent. All right. Anything else? Any questions on the web? All right. All right. Well, thank you guys very much, and let us know. Okay. Thanks.
Fill out your evaluation form, share.org/evaluation.
All right. Thank you.